I'm Shruti. I'm a former engineer and I have an MBA and a background in innovation consulting and technology. Today, I'm here to talk to you about strategic planning, but quickly, a little bit before that, currently I run my own practice as a leadership coach, and I work with leaders, entrepreneurs, and individuals, working with them on meaningful changes that matter to them. And that's what I really love about my job. So now let's jump in. And I'm here to talk to you about the practice of strategic planning because I find that this is an area that a lot of my clients are talking about all the time. And it's something that many of us struggle with as well. And so I thought I'd share with you what I've learned along the way, along my journey. And hope you have pens, notepads, Word document, whatever works for you ready so that if something resonates with you, you can, make note of it and go back with that as, your happy insights. So before we jump in, I'm also really curious to hear what got you all to the session today. And so we have a quick poll. I'm going to be sharing with you the 3 questions that we'll have in the poll, and then we'll open it out before diving in. All right, so how relevant are strategic planning skills for your current role as you see it? The next question is, how relevant are strategic planning skills for your future roles? And lastly, how confident do you feel about your strategic planning skills as of today? Okay, so this is a mixed room, which is always good. And as expected, there are more of us who think strategic planning is perhaps more relevant for our future selves than for our current selves, as we can see. A lot of us think that it's relevant in our current roles, but it's extremely relevant when we look at our future roles. And confidence is, it's somewhat, that's fine. 2 things that I'm hoping that you'll all walk away with by the end of our session today. One, that irrespective of what role you are in today, that strategic planning is equally relevant to all of you and that you can leverage it towards whatever goals it is that you want to work towards. And the other intention that I have for you is that, wherever you are on the confidence scale, by the end of our session, that you've each gone up at least by 1 level. So that's my intention for today. And with that, I'm ready to sort of dive in. So we'll be talking about the why, what, and how of strategic planning today. So let's begin with, let's see, yes. What is strategic planning and who is it for? So strategic planning is nothing but your ability to clarify where you want to be in the future and create a clear plan for how to get there. It sounds quite simple, right? Then why do we have an entire talk dedicated to it? Well, that's because we live in a VUCA world. VUCA stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. Volatility really refers to the speed of change, whether in your industry, in the market that you're a part of, or the world in general. Uncertainty refers to the lack of predictability about the future. I mean, how many of us, even in our wildest dreams, had imagined COVID-19 would hit us when we were making our plans for 2020, right? Similarly, complexity really refers to how there are always a number of different factors, varieties of those factors, and different relationships between those factors that we need to be considering as we look to make our decisions. So it's never really a simple equation. There is a lot more that goes into making your decisions and making your planning, right? And the last aspect is ambiguity, right? Which really refers to how, there are situations where we have either lack of information or inaccurate information or contradictory information. So it's never really black or white, but we still need to be able to make our decisions in the gray, right? So we have a VUCA world, and to add to that, our energy is limited because each of us has many different demands on our time, whether that is in terms of personal responsibilities, whether that's in terms of, job pressures or even your aspirations, and the list can go on. Now, these are all what makes strategic planning a topic big enough and difficult enough to be discussed. But I'll share with you what the good news is as far as strategic planning is concerned. And that is, you're not alone if you feel lost every time you think of strategic planning. There are many people who are in the same boat as you. And strategic planning is not nearly as hard as it seems. In fact, it's not meant to increase the difficulties that you already have. It's meant to help you along, right? So strategic planning can really help you succeed even when change is the only constant. It can help you get closer towards the goals that you really want for yourselves, right? And today we're going to be looking at how can we learn to navigate strategic planning with the right mindset and tools. So we'll dive right in to first talk about what's the mindset for strategic planning, right? The goal of strategic planning is not to come up with a perfect plan that can be executed flawlessly, where you have, where you know very clearly exactly how things are going to play out. In fact, that's not even possible, right? Because even the best laid plans will have to be modified when you get into the battlefield and when you come across the plans of your competition or, circumstances that you're not ready for, right? So the purpose of strategic planning is really have thought through very clearly about where is it that we want to get to and plan for it such that your plan is going to act more like a compass that you can go back to every time that you need to make a decision, as opposed to a map that tells you exactly what's going to happen. So ideally, if you're doing strategic planning well, you're going to be thinking about different scenarios that may play out, and hence what are your options, what are your risks, what are your trade-offs, and also what's your critical path, which you need to protect, right? Which really refers to what are your non-negotiables as far as strategic planning is concerned. And so a really nice quote to sum up the mindset with which you want to go into strategic planning with is by Eisenhower, where he says, plans are nothing, planning is everything. And so that's why we're here talking about strategic planning today, right? And now that we've spoken about the mindset, we'll get into the process. But as we get into the process, I'm going to share with you another quote, this time by Einstein. And it goes like this: if I had an hour to solve a problem, I'd spend 55 minutes thinking about the problem and 5 minutes thinking about solutions. Why am I sharing it with you at this point? It's because today, as we go through the different steps in the process of strategic planning, you're going to see that we'll be spending a considerable amount of our time in discovering what is it that we want to work towards, what are the needs that we want to apply strategic planning for, right? And then come up with strategic planning and execution of it. So the steps that we're going to walk through start from, we're going to understand needs that we want to apply strategic planning to. Then we're going to brainstorm strategies to meet those needs. Then we're going to shortlist, evaluate, choose, and refine the strategy that we choose to go ahead with. Then we're going to break it down to say who is going to do what by when, and how are we going to be able to measure the success of our strategy. And last but not the least, we're going to look at the role of execution, the role of strategic planning, when it comes to execution, right? So let's dive right in. And as we get into talking about the first step, I want to introduce you to a really useful framework for thinking about business. And it comes from a book called Conscious Business: How to Build Value Through Values by Fred Kaufman. So Fred talks about how every business has 3 dimensions. He refers to that as I, it, and we. So really, it refers to a business's ability to meet its goals, to achieve its vision, and to fulfill its mission. We refers to the relationships that exist within an organization and whether there is a community that's built on mutual trust, respect, and solidarity within the organization. And I really refers to whether individuals within the organization feel a sense of well-being, fulfillment, and meaning as they're going about their daily jobs, right? So for the purposes of our conversation today, I'm going to refer to it as the business. I'm going to refer to we as the team, and I'm going to refer to I as you, simply because, I'm going to be addressing you during the session, right? Why are we even talking about this, framework, and what does this mean in terms of, what does it mean in terms of, let me say, relevance to strategic planning, right? So usually when we all get to strategic planning, we have one of the three as our default lenses through which we approach strategic planning. For example, if you're a leader in an organization, the chances are that you're thinking about strategic planning from the lens of the business, right? You're asking yourself questions like, how do we make more money? What will make shareholders more happy, right? It does not mean that you're not necessarily looking at the other lenses, but just that this is your primary lens of approaching strategic planning. Similarly, if you are, let's say, a team leader or a people manager, the chances are you're thinking, how do I keep my team happy? What can I do to develop my staff? And if you are an individual contributor, the chances are you're really thinking from the standpoint of your own long-term career growth. So questions like, what do I want? How do I influence the cross-functional team I am a part of, right? And it's not that any of these lenses are wrong, they're important. But what I'm here to propose to you today is that for effective strategic planning, you need to, one, become aware of what your default lens is for strategic planning, and to expand your understanding of the other two lenses so that you can really plan effectively, right? And so let's look at how do we understand what are the needs and pain points of each of these three lenses. We'll first start with the business lens. Now, when I'm talking about the business, whose needs am I really referring to? I'm talking about the shareholder or investor needs, the board's needs, C-suite's needs, right? And you may be wondering, wait a minute, isn't the business supposed to be meeting customer needs? And you're right, if that thought crossed your mind, right? Because no business can be successful if it does not meet the needs of its customer. But at the same time, if you think about it as, there is a relationship between your business and the customer, it needs to be an equal relationship where your business is not just meeting the customer's needs, but its own needs, right? The organization's needs. So that's the only way where you're able to not just have a successful organization, but a sustainable one, where you're not just meeting the customer needs, but also meeting your own business needs, right? So for the purposes of our conversation today, I'm going to really focus on how do you identify the needs of the business, right? And when you look at the business, there are usually two broad buckets under which we could place the needs. One is what are basic needs of the business, and the other is what are unique needs of your business, right? So basic needs are really needs like make money, spend less, increase our market share, or reduce our risk, which is so long as you're a for-profit private organization, irrespective of which industry you belong to, you will have these needs, right? And these are just some examples. It's not a comprehensive list in any way, but this gives you an example of needs that are common across industries, across organizations. If you're perhaps a non-profit or you belong to a governmental organization, then instead of making money, a basic need of yours may be, how can I have more impact or reach more people through our work? Right? But these are basic needs that every organization has. Similarly, there are unique needs that organizations have, which will be very specific to your organization. Examples of unique needs are innovation. If you think of it, Tesla and Google pride themselves on innovation as being a unique need of theirs. Similarly, customer satisfaction is a unique need. Zappos is a great example of a company that says, customer happiness matters first, no matter what, right? And balancing purpose and profit is another example of a unique need, especially if you're, a certified B corporation. An example is Tom's Shoes. This organization really donates a pair of shoes to somebody in need in some part of the world for every pair of shoes that's bought for them. So that is really important to them, right? And as you can see the pattern here, unique needs really differ completely from organization to organization. So how do you find the unique needs of your organization? You do that by looking at some of these, right? One example is you look to the values of your organization, right? For example, if you're looking at Whole Foods, they care about the environment and community. If you look at Amazon, one of their values is frugality. So you can see how the unique needs of these organizations could be different because of the values that they have. Similarly, if you look at size and maturity, if you're a startup versus if you're part of a really established giant in an organization, then the needs that you're going to have are going to be very different. For example, if you're part of a VC funded startup, even before you get to creating a product, one of your unique needs would be to first prove that there is a market for your product, right? Similarly, you can look at business model of your organization. If you're working for, let's say, an Airbnb versus if you're working for one of the hotels like, I don't know, Radisson or Marriott, the needs are going to be very different. And the last lens that I'm going to propose today is industry-specific context, right? Which is, what is the specific context of the industry that you're a part of? For example, COVID-19 today has impacted all industries, all organizations without doubt. But if you're working for a grocery store, the chances are that your sales have gone up. But if you're working for, let's say, a gym, the chances are that your sales have gone down. And so the needs of, a grocery store versus a gym can be very different. And so you really can look at these different ways of identifying what are the unique needs of your business, right? A tip that I will give you, if you like to get clearer about where to find these unique needs, is also to look out for what kind of communication comes from your senior management, right? And that could be through emails, that could be through what gets discussed at town halls, right? Watch out for themes that get discussed repeatedly. Watch out for what is new in terms of, is there a new goal? For example, that they want to be a market leader in a specific category, right? So it depends completely, but it really helps to keep an eye out for the kind of communication that's coming from your senior management. So we've now covered how do you, whose needs are we talking about when we talk about the business? What are those needs and how do you find those needs? We're going to do something similar for the team and for you, right? So let's look at the team. Whose needs are we talking about when we refer to the team, right? The initial thought, which I'm sure most of you are clear about by now, is not the case, is, when we talk about the team, we just think about the immediate team with whom we're working, where we all report to the same manager. But here, when we think about we, as Fred Kaufman puts it, or the team as we are looking at it, we're really referring to every single stakeholder that you may work with at different points during your time in the organization. That could include your managers, it could include your managers' managers, it could include your peers, whether it's in your own team or from different departments and functions. It could include your direct reports, right? And what kind of needs are we talking about when we say understand the needs of your team, right? Now, these are some examples, of course. As you're working together on a project, you want to understand, do we have a shared vision that we're all clear about and that we're working towards? Are we all clear about each of our expectations and priorities when we're working together? Are there processes that are streamlined and good enough that allow us to function at our optimal best? Are there gaps in communication as we work together with these different people? And last but not the least, are there ways in which we could improve our collaboration, support each other better, etc., right? So again, these are some examples, but how do you really go about finding the team's needs? You do that by, one, putting yourself in their shoes, where you think, wait a minute, I'm only coming from the lens of how I'm seeing the situation. How could they be viewing in this situation? And the other is to really ask them. Because at the end of the day, none of us is a mind reader. None of us really knows what are the struggles, challenges, or aspirations that another person is sitting on, right? Or what perspectives that they're sitting on. So unless we ask them, we're really functioning from a place of my perspective plus my assumption of their perspective. So ask, ask, ask. I couldn't stress more on that. The next is, of course, you. And obviously, here we're talking about your needs. This doesn't need me to explain further, but I will share, some samples of your needs. Um, just humor me, and you may already be familiar with these being some potential needs that you may have, but just for the sake of just so that we know what we're talking about, right? So examples of your needs could be, what is the kind of impact that I want to have in the organization? What is the kind of influence that I'm looking to have? Am I happy doing the work that I'm doing? Is the work challenging enough for me? Do I have opportunities for growth in my organization? And, do I have good work-life balance? I do recognize that, work-life balance is somewhat of a controversial term to use nowadays, but, if that's a need for you, then that's what it is, right? Now I'm also going to talk to you about how do you identify your needs? And here you may really be wondering, why is this slide even there? And that's because, I've worked with a lot of clients where, as we dive deeper, they realize that, I want to get much more clearer about what really matters to me. What are my needs? What are my wants? And so there are different ways in which you could really approach that. I'm just sharing with you one simple activity, which I found to be really effective when I've used it with my clients. And that is simply to list for yourself 3 different 5-year plans. The first plan is where you see yourself at the end of 5 years if you continue doing exactly what you're doing, and continue with the same kind of, let's say, learning curve, whatever it is, right? It's the default future that you're headed towards if you continue doing what you're doing as of today. The second 5-year plan is what the name says. It is your plan B, which is what do you want to be doing and what do you see yourself doing in 5 years from now if plan A, or a default future, was suddenly no longer an option for you. And the third 5-year plan to come up with is, and this is one where you can really have fun with it, is, if you had a magic wand and no restrictions whatsoever, you didn't have a limit on resources, time, energy, money, then what's the kind of life you'd want to be living in 5 years from now? And the intent of really thinking through these different 5-year plans is not necessarily to pick one or the other, but it's really to get clarity for yourself on what's getting you most excited about each of these plans, and hence get clearer about what are your most important needs, right? And it's great, of course, where there are times where my clients say, I realize that the direction I'm headed in right now is perfect for me. And that's a wonderful insight to have for yourself. Or it's great to pick out and say, I like this aspect of plan A and this aspect of plan B and this aspect of plan C. And hence these are what my needs are, right? So this is one simple activity out of many that we could have picked to go about finding your needs or getting a clearer sense of your needs. All right, so now we've understood your needs and how to find them. We've understood the team's needs and how to find them. We've understood the business's needs and how to find them. So the next logical step is to really brainstorm strategies to meet those needs. And many of you may know about these ingredients for a good brainstorm. And that is, you involve others, you involve as many people as possible. You don't need to do this alone. Be creative, be open. And at this point, whether it's realistic or not doesn't really matter. In fact, I can guarantee you that you'll surprise yourselves if you were to just allow yourself to think without restrictions and, just brainstorm openly and creatively, right? But what I'm going to introduce to you now is a secret ingredient to come up with a good strategy in the context of everything that we've spoken about till now. And that is that the best kind of strategies sits at the center of the needs of the business, the team, and you. Because think about it. If you came up with a strategy that met only your needs and the business's needs, but not the team's needs, the chances are it's not going to be very sustainable because you're not going to get much support in seeing that through because there's nothing in it for the team. Similarly, if you came up with a strategy that met just the business's needs and the team's needs, you may even get accolades for the kind of strategy that you've come up with, but internally you're going to be miserable because it's not adding to you in any way. It's not meeting your needs in any way. And similarly, if you came up with a strategy that meets, let's say, the team's needs and your needs, but not the business's needs, then you're not really going to have, sponsors who are willing to stand behind you from your leadership and who are able to say, I will back you on this strategy, right? So really the best kind of strategies are those that sit at the center of the business, the team, and you. So to sum it up, I'm going to say a good strategy is one that creates a win-win-win for the business, the team, and you, because that's when you have the highest chances of buy-in from each of these three stakeholders. Let's take a look at an example, a simple one, but to drive home the point of how you could come up with a win-win-win strategy, right? So, assume you're part of a business where a new technology has been introduced in the market and your company wants to be seen as a market leader in that particular technology. Your managers obviously want people to ramp up and start delivering as quickly as possible on this new technology. And, employees are excited as well because this is something new and they want to learn and they want to develop these new skills and they want to, of course, that will impact performance reviews. So everyone's really interested about picking up these new skills. And you yourself want to be seen as a subject matter expert in this cool new technology that is there. And so what could be an example of a good strategy that could be a win-win-win for the business, the team, and you? That is to lead a 6-month initiative across the business unit to make learning this technology fun and engaging. As you can see, because this, because there is going to be a lot of learning around this new technology, the business is happy, the team is happy, and because you are leading this, you will get your opportunity to be seen as an SME. So it's a win-win-win for all the three stakeholders in this case. Now, this is just one example of a strategy you could come up with in this scenario. And ideally, if you're brainstorming well, then the chances are that you're going to come up with a lot more strategies than just one, right? So by the end of step 2, we're really sitting on a problem of plenty. And that's why step 3 is that we need to shortlist the strategies to a smaller list, right? How do we do that? I'm going to propose to you that you can do that by just asking yourself just 2 very simple questions. The first question is, and you ask these questions for every single strategy that you've come up with, right? The first question is, does this strategy in any way compromise my values, ethics, or boundaries? And if the answer to that is yes, then you don't, you just drop that strategy. But if the answer to that is no, it does not compromise my values, ethics, or boundaries, then you want to keep that strategy in your shortlist. And the second question is to ask yourself, can I make this achievable or is this possible? Now, some of you who are big thinkers in this room may be rolling your eyes when I say this because I just told you, hey, don't worry about whether your strategies are realistic or not. And now I'm saying, wait a minute, check whether this is achievable or is this possible, right? And you're right if you're concerned about where am I headed with this. So what I would like to propose to you is that it's very important to have conviction in the strategy that you're choosing to have in your shortlist, right? And so it does not need to be that you already have capability for seeing that through today, and that's why you're saying it's achievable or possible. It could even be that you either have the capability today, or it could be that you're willing and able to build capability to see the strategy through. When Kennedy said we're going to put a man on the moon by the end of the decade, he said, we're not going to do this because it's easy, but because it's difficult. And the USA at that time didn't already have the capability. They were just willing and able to build capability to see that through. And that conviction is really, really important, because if you are going to be half-hearted about your own belief or conviction in whether you'll be able to see that strategy through or not, then the chances are that you're not, going to be very successful, because the battle is already lost, right? There's a very nice quote by Ford where he says, whether you believe you can or whether you believe you can't, you're right. And that's really what this question is addressing. Whether you believe that you can make this possible or not, either because you already have the capability or because you're willing and able to build the capability. So at the end of this shortlist stage, you've really only kept the strategies which have an answer of no, it does not compromise my values, ethics, or boundaries. And yes, I believe I can make this possible, right? So those are the two crucial questions that you're asking yourself to shortlist. But even after that, of course, if you've been very thorough and come up with many different strategies, the chances are you're still sitting on at least a few strategies, and you have to pick one of them for seeing it through. And again, I'm saying you have to pick one because I'm assuming you may have resources just for one. If you're able to say, I can proceed and execute these multiple strategies together, well, good for you, right? Or if you're able to say, you know what, I want to go ahead with all of these and I'll find a way to make it happen, that's great as well. But what if we want to be able to pick just one strategy to proceed with? That's when this step becomes really important. And that's how do you evaluate your different shortlisted strategies, and how do you choose the one strategy that you're going to go ahead with, right? And so for this, what you want to be doing is really going back to the intention with which you decided to go ahead and work on the strategic plan in the first place. So you really want to be asking yourself, which of these criteria really matters most to you in terms of your own motivation for wanting to come up with a strategic plan? Is it that you were looking for, a strategy that has the lowest risk, or one that has the highest reward, or something that's the easiest to execute, or most likely to be embraced across the organization? Or maybe you're looking at a strategy that is, the most innovative, aligns best with your values, something that has the biggest impact, or something that's the most exciting or rewarding for you. This list that I've put together here is again just a sample, right? And only you know what criteria matters most to you. So we want to use your criteria as an anchor to help you make the decision about which is the most important strategy or most relevant strategy for you, right? So feel free to add, modify, delete this list. But one tip that I'll give you is at the end of, going through the criteria that matters most to you, you need to be left with just 2 or 3 criteria that are your most important criteria. Because if you have too many criteria and too many strategies that you're trying to shortlist from, it is going to be a mess, right? So, and you're again going to have to prioritize further anyway at the time of having to pick a strategy. So I'm going to say pick only the most important 2 to 3 criteria that matters to you. And then once you have those 2 to 3 criteria, use those to choose one strategy. How are you going to do that? One way is you could rank, the different strategies that you have on a list. Let's say for you, what matters most is that it is the lowest risk and it is the highest impact, right? So in terms of riskiness, or in terms of how risky, different strategies are, you rank them from most risky to least risky. Similarly, you rank your strategies from a list of, highest impact to the lowest impact as you see it currently. And, using this ranking, you pick the one strategy that, comes out as a clear winner. If you still find it difficult just using a ranking system, it may help to use a scale of 1 to 10, where you could say on a scale of 1 to 10, how risky is strategy A, how risky is strategy B, and how risky is strategy C. Similarly, on a scale of 1 to 10, how impactful is strategy A, how impactful is strategy B, and how impactful is strategy C. And then you just sum up, the outcomes that you have from the scale, and use simple math to help you pick the strategy that has, the best numbers for you, right? So that's how you really pick one strategy from all the strategies that you've arrived at. And this doesn't mean that you need to, completely discard the other strategies that you've come up with. You could park them to get back to later, or you could keep some of them as your plan Bs, or you could say, you know what, I'm still getting these two really good strategies and I want to combine them. All of those are options, right? Because at the end of the day, these are tools in your hands so that you can use it in the best way that it works for you, right? But hopefully these tips are helpful to help you arrive at just one strategy that's most helpful to you. Now, once you have arrived at that one strategy, you want to be refining it. And what do I mean by refining the strategy, right? You want to be using the SMART framework, which many of you may be familiar with, where it's really looking at, specific, referring to how clear and well-defined is my strategy. How measurable is my strategy, because you can't really have a competition without a scorecard, right? You still need to be able to measure so that you know how's the progress, or, to even know whether you're on track or not. So you want to be making sure that your strategy is defined in a manner where it's, focused and clear, well-defined, where it is measurable, where it is achievable. And ideally, again, with achievable, I'm not referring to is it realistic with respect to our current capability, but I'm really saying either, with our current capability or willingness and ability to build capability, is it achievable? Is it relevant? Which ideally, if you've done step 1 and 2 well, and it's sitting, if your strategy is sitting at the center of the 3 needs, then it's already met the relevant category. And lastly, you want to make sure that, your strategy is time bound, right? Because unless you're very clear about the timeline that you have for your strategy, the chances are that, you're not going to, it may not be very successful, but it may also be a bit demoralizing because you don't really know what's a timeline that you're working with to see this through, right? I'll share with you an example just to make it clear about how do you take a strategy that you've picked and refine it, right? So here's the scenario. You're working for a business where innovation is seen as key for growth and differentiation, especially in times like these. There are many people within your organization who have ideas, because in their day-to-day work, they've come across instances where things can definitely be improved, innovated upon, right? But they don't really know how to scale their ideas through the organization, right? And you yourself are part of an innovation team, and you're working on many projects with respect to innovation, but you feel that, your impact is limited at this point. You feel that there is silos, and hence you're not really able to have as much impact as you'd like to if more of the organization was involved in your innovation projects. So an example of a strategy that you've really come up with because of, these 3 needs is to lead the creation of an online platform that increases the innovation pipeline for the organization. As you can see, this is a win because it allows the business to have more innovative projects in the pipeline. It's a win for people because they can contribute on this online platform, and it's a win for you because, well, you want to have a larger impact, and you also don't want to be working in a silo, and having a platform where people can work together is going to be quite helpful. Now, this is a strategy in its, let's call it in its basic form, right? But we still want to be refining it. What is really missing in this strategy? It is already relevant because it's sitting at the center of the three needs. And I'm assuming we've already done the shortlist process and the strategy has still stayed, which means you already see it as achievable. So you know the strategy is relevant and achievable, but you don't know, what's the way to measure it, what's a timeline that you're working with, and really what exactly is this platform going to be doing. So you refine it by first adding, a way of measuring and a timeline like this. You say, lead the creation of an online platform that increases the innovation pipeline for the organization by 3 times in 2 years. So we're very clear about how you will know if this platform has been successful. And also we're very clear about by when do we need to have met this impact, right, of 3 times. Now, what is this platform going to be doing specifically? The platform will, one, teach innovation. It will allow teams to collaborate on projects, and it will allow teams to pitch solutions for internal funding. So now you're very clear. This goal is an example of one that is specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. So I hope you're feeling good by now because we actually have a very well-defined strategy that we're sitting with. Now we just need to be executing it, right? Before we do that, one thing that I like to remind all of us is that none of us is a superhero, and we can't do all of this by ourselves, right? We're going to need the collaboration of different people. We're going to want to break down this big strategy and this big aspiration and goal, which is sometime in the distant future, to what can I do today, right? To what are tangible bits that I can act on today, right? So the next thing that we're going to do is to really break down the strategy to understand who has to do what by when and how will we measure it. So the first step in breaking it down is to look at it as, what does my strategy mean for different levels in the organization? So if you were the CEO of your organization and came up with a corporate level strategy, then what does that strategy mean for the different business units? What does it mean for the different functions and departments under those business units? What does it mean for the smaller teams in those functions and departments? And finally, what does it mean for different individual contributors in your organization, right? And you want to be making sure that the strategy is not just cascading vertically, but also horizontally, which means across the organization, right? For everybody to be working together. If we took the example of the innovation project, you may have great content knowledge on innovation, but you will still need the support of the engineering team to build the platform. You will still need the support of the communications team to help evangelize your solution across the organization, right? And these are just some examples, but ideally your strategy needs to be cascading both vertically and horizontally in an organization. Next, you also want to be saying, okay, I know what these different levels are supposed to be doing, but how do we break that down into unit level tasks that I can take and act on right away, right? And for that, you're going to really break down your bigger areas of work into smaller tasks, which can be acted upon and checked off from your list. And you're also going to put very clear milestones in terms of what are going to be timelines by when you're going to achieve these different tasks, right? An example here is, I said we're going to be, you're already familiar with innovation content, but how would you now translate that to tasks, right? You would want to put down what are different steps in your innovation process, what's the content that you want for those different steps. You want to put down what are FAQs for each of those steps that people may have. What's the way in which people can know if they're really progressing and learning about it or not, right? These are just some examples of tasks. And you also want to be breaking it down all the way till what you're going to be doing over the next 2 weeks. I think this is really important, especially when you have a goal or a strategy that is 3 to 5 years away, or 2 years away, or 1 year away, right? It still seems like it's meant to happen sometime in the distant future, but you still need to be working on it today to help you get closer to achieving that goal 1 year or 2 years from now, right? So a tip I have for you in terms of what you could focus your first 2 weeks on is really breaking down the different tasks, right? Breaking down the different areas into tasks, because that is a time intensive process in itself, and it requires you to have really thought through. So give yourself the first 2 weeks. I know it can be tempting to jump in and want to execute right away the moment you have a few steps, but it'll really serve you well in the long term if you're spending your first 2 weeks breaking down these tasks and milestones, getting clear not just about what you know, but also identifying what you don't know and identifying who can help you answer what you don't know, right? So those are some things that you could be doing in your first 2 weeks. And lastly, you want to be defining metrics for every level and every milestone that you've come up with. Because it's not enough for us to say, hey, I want to multiply by 3 times the innovation pipeline in 2 years. How will you know if the platform that you're creating is going to be good enough to handle the load when it's scaled across the entire organization? Or how will you know if the content that you're creating is clear enough for people to understand well, right? So for every task that you're coming up with, you want to have defined metrics so that you're confident that that task has been completed well and you can move on to the next item on your list, right? All right, so we actually figured out now who does what by when and how do we measure it. So it sounds like we're done, right? I'd say by now you know better. Let me remind you that it's still a VUCA world. And you're still going to have those volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity coming in the way, right? So in order for you to be able to deal with that in real time, and for you to have to be confident about making the right decisions in real time, I'm going to propose that once you've really thought through the strategy till the very end, you plan different scenarios. You go back to the drawing board and you say, what's going to happen if it doesn't work out exactly as I'm planning for it to work out, right? For example, what happens if the platform takes twice as long to be developed? Or what happens if your budget gets cut in half? Or what happens if people are not really engaging with it as you would have liked them to? And you want to be thinking of these different scenarios so that you're already prepared about what could be risks, trade-offs, and options that you can play around with when you do come up against these scenarios in real time. And even if it's not the exact same scenarios, it will still help you because you've thought through some options for a different scenario that may actually help you and be relevant to whatever situation you come up with in real time, right? The other thing that you really definitely want to be doing at this point is get really, really clear on what your non-negotiables are, because those are what are going to help you make the hard choices in real time and again feel confident about those choices. For example, if it's a non-negotiable for you that the innovation pipeline of the organization has to multiply by 3 times by the end of 2 years, then if you find that engagement isn't as great on the online platform, you're able to say, because the 3 times impact is the most important for me, I'm going to mix it up a bit. I'm going to actually include a bit of offline engagement along with the online engagement. And you're able to take those decisions because you're very clear about what is not a compromise that you're willing to make, right? So you come up with the real-time decision-making criteria, and this is really going to serve you when rubber hits the road, when the pressure is high, right? All right, so we've done this, and now it is actually finally time for execution. And a lot of you must be going, planning is finally done. We can get to execution, and we're ready. But a quick reality check. Planning is never really done. You're going to have to continue planning even during execution, right? And that is very important simply because, the first plan that you come up with, it's not going to be perfect. In fact, even your second, third, or fourth plan may not be perfect. And you need to be okay with it simply because, there are going to be things that you can't predict for everything. You can't have a perfect condition. If everything works out as you plan, that's fantastic. But the chances more often than not are that, you are going to come across challenges even with all the planning that we've done. So during execution, the part of planning that you need to be really doing is you need to be focusing on learning. And keeping at it, because only with that are you able to learn, not just learn, but also improve and able to keep evolving your plan to the next level. Here's a very simple way in which you can, check in and learn and modify your plan going forward. And the intention of this is to just ask yourself 4 very simple questions periodically, right? You just ask yourself, what's working in the plan currently? What can be improved now? Because, I'm seeing it pan out in real time. I'm able to see, hey, wait a minute, there are these different opportunities for improvement. What did we learn as a result of the challenges that we've come across so far? And how can we apply our learnings to evolve and modify our plan and make it better in the next iteration, right? The more frequently you can have this check-in process and ask yourself these 4 very simple questions, the more agile you can be in terms of, in terms of execution, right? So the planning and execution will feed off of each other and support each other through the process. So with this, I'm almost at the end of my presentation because, and I'm going to like to leave you, I'd like to leave you with this motto, right, to walk away with. And that is plan, learn, improve, repeat. Now, plan is where we've spent 95% or more of our time during the conversation today. But if you were to just focus on the planning without doing the learning, improving, and repeating, then I'm sorry to say, but you're going to end up a bit disappointed because you can't really achieve the kind of mastery in strategic planning that you'd like to if you didn't continue the learn, improve, and repeat, right? So you have to keep going. Plan, learn, improve, repeat. Plan, learn, improve, repeat. That's why this talk wasn't called, how do you do strategic planning once? It was called the practice of strategic planning. Do treat this as a practice. The more you work on it, the better you will get at it. I can promise you that.